Welcome to the BSNBuffs.com fall camp overview here on a beautiful overview of the entire Boulder Valley. William Whalen, the editor of BSNBuffs.com, my assistant editor, Jake Shapiro, and we are here today to talk about the defensive backfield for these Colorado Buffaloes. Who's most exciting? Who's a leader? Who has something to prove? Jake, this is a group that has gone over a lot of change because you had household names that have now moved on, but you have a senior in Chidobe Awuzie, who you and I talked about before turning on the camera, that is the leader. He is the star of this defensive backfield.
Yeah, Cheeto's a guy that would have gotten drafted this year had he been out. He is such a good defensive player all over the ball, whether he's playing in that nickel position, sort of a linebacker, or out wide. He is the difference maker for this entire defense, the star for the entire defense, let alone the defensive backfield. Yeah,
Todd McShay, the ESPN NFL analyst, so I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of generally, or anybody over there at the Four Letter Network, but Todd McShay did have quite a few nice things to say about Chidobe Awuzie recently on Twitter, turning on his film and saying that Awuzie played the nickel, he played the corner like a linebacker, and we've seen that. The big hits, the big plays, and he started to turn those into turnovers last year. He hadn't recorded an interception before his junior campaign. He did do that as a junior, and we're looking for big things from him as a senior, I would think. What kind of production do you expect to see from him?
Well, I expect him to be in kind of a Swiss Army knife type role. We saw a little bit last year when he's coming off the end and blitzing the quarterback. It works so well. So I expect with this healthier defense, because the defensive backfield did get quite injured last year with Ryan Moeller going down. At one point, Ted was kind of in and out at a few points in the season. So I expect him to be able to move all around the defense and be able to impact the game from all the levels on the defense, whether that mean shutting down a wide receiver for a game, or shading a running back, or shading a quarterback. I think it's such a huge thing, especially with a linebacking core that's kind of in question, in my opinion, going into this year, that you have a guy that adds a different dimension to your defense.
Absolutely, and I don't think Chidobe Awuzie is going to be taking anybody by surprise this year. I expect to see him on a lot of postseason lifts in terms of conference honors and otherwise. Who's the guy that we might see take people by surprise coming into this year in the defensive backfield?
Well, we talked about it on the BSN Buffs podcast a few days ago, but Isaiah Oliver might end up being the best defensive back on this team by the end of the year, right there, hand in hand with Chidobe Awuzie. He has all of the tools to be a great defensive back.
Oliver's a guy who, he sticks out to you right away because of his speed, his closing speed, but he started to make plays on the ball last year as the year went on that I think was really impressive. And
as a true freshman, and that's not easy to do.
And we saw great fluidity from a freshman group of DBs about 4 years ago, and those guys never were, of course, talking about Ken Crawley specifically, he never quite put it all together at Colorado. Isaiah Oliver's a guy that I think we're looking for to do that going forward. Who's a guy that you think has the most to prove this year coming in the defensive backfield?
I think there's actually a handful of guys that have a lot to prove, but my guy that needs to show something, that really needs to show something from the defensive backfield, is Ahkello Witherspoon. He's been really hot and cold throughout his entire career. He'll make a big play here,
and then he'll get absolutely burned. We talked about that on the BSN Buffs podcast as well.
Yeah, and you know what? He's just a guy that needs to figure it out. And if he is any sort of solid or any sort of, just consistent, I think it lets Cheeto do his job better, knowing that the guy on the other side is able to do his job.
I totally agree. And I look at a guy like Tedric Thompson, who has had a really good career by a lot of standards. But he was a guy that prior to last year, people were picking to be maybe the first or second best safety in the entire Pac-12, a guy that we thought might garner a little bit more national attention due to his play, and he had a solid year last year. I don't think anybody would tell you otherwise, but I think I'm still waiting for him to take that huge next step, in his progress to where he goes from a really good player to an NFL caliber safety right away, and that we recognize that from the get-go. And finally, as we wrap up this segment and our look at the defensive backfield, I want to talk about guys that we're most excited to watch this year. For me, it's Ryan Moeller, a guy who's been through a lot in his career at Colorado, a guy that obviously had an interesting journey to this final season in Boulder. I would say that somebody who's so solid, that interception that he made in the end zone last year was one of the most athletic plays we saw from any Buffs defender last year. I'm excited to see what he can do, hopefully in a full season of health.
Yeah, for me, there's a few guys. Afolabi Laguda comes to mind. You have Nick Fisher, who could be a difference maker on this defense. But I think Ryan Moeller or Tedric Thompson are personally my two guys that I'm looking forward to watch. Chidobe Awuzie tweeted out the other day how they still sleeping on Ted. You know, really,
How?
You know, Tedric Thompson, as you said, you know, he's been quiet at times, but when he impacts the game, he might be the most impactful player on the defense because he can absolutely spark the team with a big hit or a big turnover.
Yeah, and of course, it's hard not to say that we're excited about Chidobe Awuzie. I mean, when you have a senior of this caliber, he's going to be fun to watch. I think the entire defensive backfield is going to be fun to watch. Make sure you keep it locked here.
It could be a strong point of this team even.
Because I think as we move forward in our previews, you're going to see there are a lot of questions everywhere. This is college football. There aren't a lot of certainties. This defensive backfield could be one of the most improved units, I think, as we look at this program compared to a couple years past. And make sure to keep it locked here on bsnbuffs.com as we continue our fall camp overview leading to the start of the season.